Welcome to another episode of Heal and Manifest podcast. I am Cynthia Flores, your host, and today I have a super special guest. Her name is Cynthia Magaña, and I will talk a little bit about her in a second. But today we're going to be really focusing on this very important topic that a lot of us navigate as adults, and it's about navigating adult relationships, making adult friendships, right? What are the challenges that come up and ways that we can start cultivating community and supportive friendships. So stay tuned. And all right, let me introduce Cynthia Magaña. Cynthia Magaña, pronouns she, they. She is a licensed clinical social worker, consultant, yoga teacher, and sound practitioner. Since practice centers to enhance the well-being of high-achieving professionals, creatives, and wellness providers of color who experience anxiety, perfectionism, and uncertainty, anticipating major life transitions. Cynthia, Tocaya, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to be talking about this important topic. I'm sure we all have stories, good, the bad, the ugly, the amazing kind of healing experiences, navigating relationships, friendships, building community, which is so important in our healing and our journeys. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing really well, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really, really excited that we get to talk about adult relationships and all the things that come with it. So thank you for inviting me, Cynthia.
Of course. I wanted to start with a question, and this is something that I want to start integrating in the podcast with my guest speakers. And it's about, this podcast is about healing and manifesting. And of course, everyone has their own individual journey of what that looks like. But I'm curious for you, it could be something related to what we're talking about today, cultivating community and supportive friendships. But what is it that for you in your experience and your journey of healing and manifesting, what is it that you've had to kind of encounter or go through to heal and to manifest? And where are you with that?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Seriously, I feel like for 2020, like a decade, I've been fucking with manifesting. And it really goes back for me to thinking about ideal scenes for me, like what have been ideal scenes that I've pictured myself, and I actually started vision boarding in community college with my counseling one professor, Andrea Torres at Mount Sac. And she invited us to, put on a poster, like, where do we want to go? Where do we want to see ourselves in? What are the things and feelings and sensations that we're attracting? And I kid you not, really, I found myself in these specific instances, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I put this on my mood board, or oh my gosh, this is something that has been around and I'm now doing it. And so every new year, I create a vision board of where I hope to see myself go, some words that, make me feel like I'm Cyn or Cynthia, and I try to get to that feeling of where I'm at those images and feelings. And I'd say when I really manifested something tangible 2 times with my housing. So I'm from Southern California, grew up in LA, went to school in the suburbs, but I uprooted from California to New York, and I was the first in my family to uproot. I wanted to feel one, I wasn't contributing to gentrification, or if so, how am I minimizing my footprint of contributing to gentrification? And also, I knew I wanted to be in community that felt like home for me. So I ended up in a neighborhood in Brooklyn that was predominantly Mexican-American, Dominican neighborhood called Bushwick. And it's a love-hate relationship, but I always really wanted to contribute back to the community, and I did in the work that I did, as well as wanting to feel a sense of safety, and then also feeling a sense of home around myself, navigating grad school for the first time.
That's a big step, right? That's a big step. And thank you so much for sharing that. I know that for me also, the putting things, I've just recently been doing more of a vision boards. I've always loved that. I think think, when it comes to this question around healing and manifesting, and I think you shared an important point around wanting to serve the community, and you talked about housing. These are all important things I'm hearing that for you as someone who is conscious and aware of the impact, right, of how that looks in the community. I think that's really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Going into this topic about cultivating community and cultivating friendships, and what are some of the challenges that do come up, because there are, right, as adults. I think this is something that I've heard a lot on social media, friends, family, that it's just a lot harder to cultivate real, genuine friendships that really have your back, that want to see you win, that want to really support you. And I'm sure it's a challenge, right? We all have our experiences. What do you think? I mean, and the way that I reached out to you, and I initially, a couple of months ago, was through Instagram. And I know I've been on a quest, and I've been manifesting community. And the reason why I think it's so important, because I think as a collective culture, right, the Latina culture, BIPOC culture, that's another form of healing, right? I know that for me, there was a point in my life, in my early years in my career, when I was trying to still figure out my identity. And I shared a little bit of this in my first episode of this podcast, where I was feeling lost. I was feeling so isolated and lonely. And I realized I don't feel a sense of belonging. And that lack of sense of belonging brought up a lot of mental health challenges, a lot of struggles, and showing up authentic and unapologetic and speaking up and believing that my worth and my value and what I brought into the table. So it took a while for me to start searching and realizing I don't feel a sense of belonging in these spaces, but I can go ahead and find it outside of here, because I know there are other women of color, other Latinas figuring out like the same things that I'm struggling with, finding community, finding friendships, finding a sense of belonging. And I went to a women of color group, and we just started talking about similar experiences that we were going through in the workplace, and some of the microaggressions and the discrimination and toxic work culture, and how do we uplift and elevate each other as entrepreneurs as we embark in this like self-advocacy and manifesting what we really want. And I realized, well, I feel like this is a great start, and I'm wondering, and then coming back to where I am now, as I mentioned, I reached out to you and I was like, this is where I'm at. I'm in being intentional, because I generally want to create genuine friendships. And this is how you and I connected, by the way. And I wanted to share that story. But I'm curious for you, Cynthia, what has been your experience with finding a sense of community, finding, cultivating friendships? Because this is not something that just comes out of nowhere. It's inner and outer work, right? It's effort. So what has been your experience?
Yeah. And I also just like want to like share, like, yeah, when we connected, like you met me at a very like tender time in my life. And when I was like, I was like, yeah, like I really like Cynthia's content. Like it's so great. And I just like found myself laughing. You were serious, but you weren't taking yourself seriously. And I'm like, shit, like we need more community who, knows that they're serious, know that what they mean, say what they mean what they say, but also have fun.
Yeah.
And when we connected, it was around the time my uncle passed away. And I was like, thank you so much for holding space, and it's that saying, like, you'll forget what people say, but like you'll remember how they make you feel, And for me, I'd say I felt personally kind of like an outsider. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. My family like moved out of they moved out of like our family of origin, which was East LA, Pomona, Inland Empire, and they moved us to Rancho Cucamonga, and I was like, oh my gosh, such a complete difference, because my dad worked at a tire shop, You know, my mom worked in a family business. You know, my neighbors were police officers. They had different types of like economic status that, you know, like my family was striving to get to. And while I appreciate like my family's intention, I always felt like I was an outsider, you know, and that often meant that I was like not close to my grandma, or that I had to drive, we had to go and visit my grandma or family members. So I wasn't as connected in the pod. So I always kind of felt like, man, I was like never enough, you know, and I felt like never enough, you know, at home growing up, and then never enough like in school, and like having teachers, you know, just pass me through the pipeline, or having a guidance counselor say, there's no reason for you to take the pre-SATs. You're not going to go to college, you know, along those lines.
What the fuck?
Yeah, it was bullshit. it was terrible. But it's like, well, you know, that's not what I heard at home. You know, my dad always said, you know, like, you're gonna go to college. This is what you're gonna do. This is what you're going to do. So I had to learn how to sacrifice. I really had to learn how to sacrifice, like, not being around family. And my dad always like gave that justification was because I was studying or I was at school. And while I was, I also had that sense of like belonging and connection with my family when I'd like visit for not all the birthdays, but for my Tia's birthday, my uncle's birthday.
Yeah.
So, you know, where I found community for the first time, you know, and I also want to say, like, it's so common for us to not feel like we have a sense of belonging or even know what community even feels like. And I found community, you know, through friends. And I also found a lot of community through music. That's how I like figured myself out. I was like, okay, I want to hang out with the people who listen, who's listening to what I listen to. If I wasn't, since I wasn't feeling enough. And that was like actually like in the rave scene and like back in the day. You know. But I don't know. It's so funny because I feel like this is also me going on a tangent, so feel free to take this
that's
off.
fine. I mean, it's all related.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. You think, you know, my parents are teen parents, so you think about it like of like Chicano, like Miami bass music and like funk, and then kind of circling back that generation like a few years or like a decade or two, and it's like your daughter finds house music. You can't get mad at her.
And you know what? You're right. I think a lot of people think that finding community, and of course, thank you so much for sharing that, your experience, because I find this is very, very common for a lot of folks, for a lot of my clients, being far away from family, having to relocate to spaces and areas where you don't see yourself reflected, you know, teachers, like, honestly, it can be traumatic as fuck, right? Like, you know, being separated, feeling a sense of I'm not worthy, I don't belong, I don't, you know, we develop these narratives because of our lived experiences. And more so if there's also family dynamics and challenges where you're cut off or estranged, right, from other family because of conflict and trauma and intergenerational stuff. And it's so layered where all of these challenges come up around finding community and cultivating friendships. At the end of the day, it is about relationships. It is about connection. It is about being open and vulnerable enough to build and establish a sense of trust, a sense of like, I can be myself and I can trust and be open and vulnerable. But for various factors and reasons that, you know, that's a challenge. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience, because I'm sure we can dive deep into all of these things. But as you mentioned, finding community in music, that's also a big part that a lot of people don't think about. Finding community in music, finding community in things that you're feeling passionate or creative about, you know, and that's a big part where I'm sure you felt a lot of, or a sense of like, wow, I'm finding a sense of identity, a sense of like belonging, right, with these friendships that listen to a similar kind of music where I feel like I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm validated.
Definitely. Yeah. And also too, I wanted to share that like in professional settings, like if we were were to like, put family of origin stuff away in my own experience. But I honestly met my close friends within institutions that were women of color, folks of color. And while it's so liberating and so affirming, there's also like that need for safety. There's also that need for trust, and just like it kind of goes into maybe that interpersonal oppression of, how are we going to support each other?
Yeah.
And it's like ultimately it's like, how are we going to support each other through growth?
That's a big one. Because the thing about interpersonal relationships, right, as you're building and cultivating a friendship, and I would say this is a big challenge that we see nowadays, that people are like, you're disturbing my peace, so therefore you're calling out my shit, you're calling out my stuff, you're letting me know like, hey, these things perhaps are patterns and dynamics that you've learned, but they're not helpful in our friendships, in our relationships. And the person's like, well, either you like me or you don't. Either you like me or I walk away. Either you like me or I'll ghost you. There's that aspect, right? And I think it has become, I think on social media, this trend around like, you're disturbing my peace, so then therefore I'm not gonna do the work to work on my own things, right? Because at the end of the day, any kind of relationship, friendship, community, they're gonna mirror and they're gonna reflect areas where we are underdeveloped, maybe unhealed, or not worked through or processed. And that's an opportunity for growth and expansion and evolving and healing. But a lot of people are not in that headspace, are not in that space where they're like, okay, I see it. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to do that inner work so that way I can build those healthy relationships. And that's, I think, one of the challenges that I'm seeing a lot.
Definitely. And also too, like, what a colonized white supremacist way to just like not my problem, next, or the cut off of the relationship, and we always hear about like, let's heal in community. Like, let's do it, but it really does depend on another person, of like that capacity and that ability to look at their stuff and also look at our own stuff.
100%. And I think vulnerability, right? Having the courage to be open and vulnerable, that's literally the way to connect, right? If we are open and vulnerable, but yet I think what happens, and I think another challenge with cultivating communities or cultivating friendships is like, there's been, I do want to mention that there has been the overuse of power and control, of certain communities to do harm, right? Whether we're talking about religious communities, whether we're talking about institutions, whether we're talking about the educational system, whether we're talking about spiritual communities, whether we're talking about any form of community that is out there. I've experienced it myself in spiritual communities. A lot of people experience religious, spiritual trauma. A lot of people, and I think that what happens is the use and abuse of power and control and manipulation. This is why a lot of people struggle building community, because they're like, I've experienced this. I don't want to go through it. I don't want to be in this community because it's hard. And I don't trust, there's some trauma and some wounds behind that. And we see it all the time. We see it in documentaries. We see it in real life experiences with our clients. We see it on the news. We see it on TikTok. We see it everywhere, right? And I want to just really mention that because not a lot of people talk about that. And this is where a lot of people mistrust the system. A lot of people mistrust building or being part of a community because they're like, I've been there. But also, not only have they been, there's also intergenerational scars, right? Because for Black and Brown communities, for BIPOC communities, there's systemic institutional racism and oppression, historical oppression. So I think these are things that come up from older generations. Oh, don't go there. Don't trust that. So the belief systems are the ones that are passed on. And then people are like, ooh, I have to be careful with that. So then I'm not even going to go there.
And you know what, Cynthia, like I join you. And also I've been like toying with this idea around like energetic boundaries and just boundaries within collectivist culture. And that saying like in our culture is like mi casa es su casa, and what a concept of just like that micro moment or that like micro kind of statement of lack of boundaries. And I'm laughing. I'm laughing because, you know, there is that trust. You know, I'm letting you into my house. I'm letting you into my door, you know, and then we walk through the lens of like, I'm going into this institution, I'm going to this spiritual community showing up. But, you know, like we go through life, we're going to see like people are litigious, you know, people are not going to move in the way that we do. People are going to come out of their face and really show themselves, you know, behind closed doors, you know, and it makes us feel like we're the ones of like, oh, can I trust you if you're like hanging out with that person or like collaborating with that person? Can I trust you if, you know, if I'm seeing you in this particular, you know, on this particular board, you know, or can I fuck with you if you're following the old president that I won't say his name, you know?
Yeah. You know, there, and then there's also cancel culture, right? Pop culture, where I think I have my own feelings, conflicting feelings about that, because at the end of the day, we are imperfect human beings. But rather than canceling and be like, I don't want to see this person's face, I don't want to see this person, it's like, how does that help you understand the big picture, you know? And I understand, I think there's a lot of division and hate and polarity that has been happening online and just in general in our humanity. But I think what cancel culture is that it also does a lot of harm, because we're not really accepting that this is the reality, and we're just like, I don't want to see it. And how does that help us kind of be better, do better, understand, be compassionate, empathic? It's complex. It brings up a lot of feelings for people, but it's just another challenge, right, when it comes to building communities. And I know we've been talking a lot about communities, but what about friendships, right? Because there's also that. It comes from our own upbringing, our experiences, our relationship dynamics in our family system, our beliefs about relationships and friendships. You know, sometimes we hear from parents, because they've had bad experiences, you know, they're like, oh, no confíes en nadie, no existen amigos, no existen amistades, you know, and then people believe that and they internalize that, and they go out in the world thinking, well, I have to be really wary because I can't trust, you know. Or there's also a lot of, you know, red flags and people that perhaps don't have the best intentions in friendship dynamics because of their own experiences. But what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, no, I hear, like, for me, I'm hearing two things. And like one aspect is like I also see that like with my clients, especially like my young Latina first gen clients, of like feeling scared to trust in themselves and to trust in the world around them. And it is, I have a lot of love and compassion, and also how as like therapists can we show them to trust themselves in making those different shifts. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice, and I really enjoy that. And also we see from the back end and in our own work how generational that is, and also how we might also be missing those like moments, those gut sensations that we might have, the prickly kind of experiences that we maybe encounter on, or even like think about like what is a good friend. Yeah.
So that's a good question. That's a great question.
Yeah.
What makes a good friend? You know, and I'm sure this is different for everyone, and everyone has a very unique experience when it comes to cultivating friendships. But I guess I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? What makes a good friend?
Definitely. You know, for me, I really think about the values that I love about the Chicano culture that I really resonate with. Mexican American identity. And while one is family, there is that family, like blood family, but then there's also chosen family. Like as a queer person, for me, I had to work really hard to think about, who is in my family that isn't my blood or that is my blood, that is going to join me, and make me feel safe in my body and also champion me, So one is family, and also this other aspect, and I feel like it's a perspective kind of aspect, but like loyalty and respect. And it's like for loyalty, it's obviously, like don't fuck me over. But also too, like if there's private information that I have or that you might have, please don't share my information unless it's coming from my mouth or coming from consent, and respect. Yeah, it's very in alignment of like canceling culture. I want, like, not only do I want to have friends who support me, say yeah to me, but I also want friends who are going to call me out on my shit, repair that aspect. And I have a really good friend who gave me consent to share our friendship dynamic and like what ultimately happened, and like how it does support like amigahood, how it does support that chosen family aspect. And I was in grad school. She was running for city council in a town in Southern California. And, we both met each other in nonprofit. We met each other at a nonprofit down in LA, and we just became immediate liking. Like we just jived with each other. Good food, good music, just good times. And she was also such a great supporter in making my decision, helping me make my decision to move to New York. That's one person who I could say was really championing me. And as I was making those transitions, I was really seeing like who was fading from my life that was so close to me at this time in my 20s. And she didn't teeter because I was going to move. And I have a few good friends who didn't teeter because I was moving. And what happened was, we maintained our friendship, like monthly phone calls, bi-monthly phone calls. She came to my graduation, and then she like told me like, I'm running for city council. Wow. And I was like, okay, fully support you. Her name's Jeanette, like fully support you, Jeanette. She was asking me to do like a few things for her. And I was like, I was starting a new job. It was like right after graduation. So I was starting a new job, getting used to it. And I was like, thought I was implementing boundaries, and like some asks that she was asking me, she's like, hey, like I need this thing done soon. Can you get it done? And I'm like, hey, like I actually am feeling like swamped. Can I do this for you? X, Y, and Z, And she's like, yeah, that's fine. But the support was still there, But then, there was something that happened when I came back from New York. I was visiting home for a bit, and I always came to visit her. And I noticed that there was like some dynamic that was shifting between us. And I was like, hey, like, what's going on? And she was like, you don't support me. And I was like, really? I was leaning in with a lot of curiosity because I know that wasn't my experience. And she was actually one of the first people to model for me what it's like to call me in, but also tell me like what they need in a friendship. And what ultimately happened was, she shared that I wasn't supporting her, that I wasn't making, she would have liked if I made like donations to her campaign, if I would share. And this was like pre 20. So like way before, like I'd say like Instagram was like up and up on GoFundMe's, and, just in that type of, we lived cyberly, but it wasn't as present as I felt it it was in 20 back in the day, or 28. When she told me that, I really had to look at myself, and think about, I could have easily said, nah, that's not it, whatever, like, we can just end our relationship. And I wasn't, because she was like, she's a sister to me, and I was like, I really listened to her, and I'm like, okay, I'm hearing that what you need from me is to show up for you. And showing up for someone can look so different. I wouldn't have, showing up can look so different. That's what I'm going to say. But what that ultimately looked like is, I started contributing monthly to her campaign. She needed that. She was self-funded and fully funded. And it's like, like, I'm going to support my homie in helping them with what they want to achieve and get. Yes, I'm going to reshare a post because that's really important. And, where, I lived in Long Beach, it was like, there was like a little community bubble of like people in my pod, since I lived there for a while. And also just really learning from her. She was like maybe the first person who really showed me the difference of like supporting one another. And she like straight up told me, she's like, like when you do something for yourself, you're going to see who supports you and who doesn't support you. And
100%.
girl, she is right.
And thanks for sharing this, because this is something that I see a lot. And I don't know why TikTok I'm on TikTok just the chismosa, like just seeing what people are saying, observing, because that's what I do. So I see a lot of people sharing like stories about friendships, right? Navigating friendships, being a girl's girl. What does that look like? But I see a lot that when they start becoming more successful or winning or doing things that they love and they're passionate about, they realize, well, if you don't see people liking your post and responding and sharing and rooting for you, then they don't care, then they don't. And I think there is a level of, I think we shouldn't generalize that that's what's happening, but a lot of people interpret that and make assumptions that that's what's happening. But you bring up a big point, that what your friend said, that is very true. I do want to acknowledge and validate that. So pay attention, y'all, pay attention. But also, I really love that your friend was able to communicate with you and state her needs and do the repair process, which is what relationships take and friendships take. They take work. And they take communication, because when we start making assumptions, when we start generalizing, when we start personalizing, when we start catastrophizing, which are all distortions, right? Unhelpful thinking patterns that we've internalized because of our experiences, then that's not helpful in repairing and building healthy friendships and community. So it's really about communication, as you mentioned. And I really love that she communicated, this is what I need to feel supported. This is what I would like you to do, right? To feel like you care, to feel like you support me. And it's great that you were able to be open and curious rather than like, no, that's not true. Like you were open because you cared and you wanted to be receptive and build and cultivate that friendship. And I think that's beautiful. And this is what really it takes to start cultivating friendships, is really being open to be vulnerable, right? To share, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Like, this is what I need. This is my boundary. Can we work with that? Right? It's navigating those difficult conversations, being open, assertive, empathic, understanding, compassionate, and building that trust, right? And that with communication. And I think that that's what it takes, and it's a daily thing. And I know I've seen a lot also, the high maintenance, the low maintenance, right? I've seen a lot of TikToks too, and all this pop culture that comes up that I'm always like trying to understand what's happening. That people are like, I'm a low maintenance person, right? That's what people say. I'm a low maintenance person because I don't need to be talking on the phone with my besties every day. I know that when I come back and we see each other, we're going to follow up. We're going to support each other. We're going to root for each other. We're going to want to see each other win. And I think that is also valid. I think figuring out what is going to what works for you in your friendships, right? What's going to be helpful for you. And if you need more time with your friends, if you need to socialize more, then figuring that out. Everyone, as you mentioned, showing up for your friends, showing up in community is going to look very different for everyone, right? So figuring out what that looks like for you and what you would like it to look like for you.
Thank you for that. It reminds me of the phrase that my partner shares, how they define friendship. And I've started using it and incorporating it in my practice because I'm like, that's such a great and simple way of saying, like, go. They say go where it's warm, and I love that because we're going to be put in these precarious situations, like as adults, like navigating the workforce, as we're navigating entrepreneurship, as we're navigating whatever sphere that we're in. And if we're using social media, for example, we might feel like we're not enough or we don't fit this like social media prototype. And it's like, but we're trying to gain validation or acceptance from, we might actually, if we were to take a minute, we might actually trying to get acceptance from somebody we don't even want acceptance from, or maybe even our ideal clients or the people who we're trying to attract and cultivate, which is why for me, in like my own social media relationship, I try to be very transparent. It's like, this is how I move in the world, and I'm not going to have a cookie cutter kind of image or follow my brand guidelines that, to a T that I paid for. Then and it's like, yeah, like we are the authorship, and it reminds me of my partner saying go where it's warm. So how are we feeling in these specific spaces? And what comes to mind is Mia Minguez. She, just to check in, are you familiar with Mia Minguez?
No.
Okay, so she is a chronically disabled Asian American based in the Bay Area. She created pod mapping. And pod mapping is this concept coming from transformative justice, where we hold ourselves accountable, but also where community holds ourselves accountable, especially in times of crisis, in times of conflict or safety, and also supporting us in our own sense of resiliency. And in another way, we were just reading cards, so I'm like in this esoteric spiritual vibe right now, thinking of ourselves as constellations. We are the center of our star, Think of us as our center of our star. Who are the other stars or people in our life that are going to call us who are going to call us out on our shit, is going to hold us accountable, who is going to also like champion us and support us. Those are the people that we want. And sometimes they might not be our best friend that we go to brunch with or that we go to the concerts with. It might actually be, somebody who has been such a great referral network to us. It may be somebody who has been, a really reliable person, like in a specific community. And it's okay if they're not like that direct person. Sometimes we don't want that. We want
sometimes
those
it's our family.
Yeah. And then it expands, and this is where the constellations is, or thinking about it in constellations is fun, is who are the people that are movable, and sometimes we might have to come to our own consensus and think about, I really, really wanted them to be in my inner circle, but my gut is telling me I can't trust you. My gut is telling me that, something saying, the ancestors are telling me something. There's just this hunch.
The body is telling you.
The body's telling you, I wanna put us in this space where it can move. Maybe in this season of my life, you're gonna be up here, but today you're gonna be a little bit sideways from me, a few steps back. There's no bad blood. I'm gonna support you, but you're not gonna have that much influence over me or impact my own sense of self-esteem and belonging, because the people that are around me are the people who do hold me accountable, who do support me. And what's beautiful is the folks that are movable, it creates less pressure or a sense of less like, do they have my back? we already know that. We came into acceptance of that.
Yeah,
And
I
then
love that. Yeah, go ahead.
the back of the people, or like behind the movable constellations, are the institutions, the resources. For me, in terms of like my own private practice or entrepreneurship, I consider like Latinx therapy such a great resource. I don't have some good community that we've met, and they're great. And also, I know that's a community resource that I can go to. I know that the specific yoga studio or a particular community is a place that I can go to in terms of resources and support. So that's how I like to kind of invite my clients, or just invite us to think about, instead of like Mikasa Sukasa, it's like, okay, like let's shape it, like,
Yeah.
yes, come in, but at this time out.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can totally resonate with that, because just like there's seasons for everything, right? We're constantly evolving and changing. We're doing new things. We're exploring new things, which I hope that we are all doing that. I think there's also that for relationships and friendships, right? Sometimes people say, well, I've outgrown this kind of friendship, and maybe that's valid, and maybe that's a possibility. And maybe this is how we realize, okay, well, where am I in my journey, my process? Are there any other people that I can invite in this like inner circle? Are there, but still maintaining those connections and those relationships? Because as you mentioned, a friendship or a connection or a community is going to help us for one particular thing, right? And then another group, another community, another friendship is going to support us in another area of our lives. So this is where we resource and we use those inner and outer resources. Right? I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Is there any like last ways or tips that you think that could be helpful in cultivating supportive community and friendships?
Honestly, Cynthia, like I'd just say, like, listen to your body, and if it's hard, I understand it's hard for us to like tune into our body, but like, I don't know, I'm of the mind of like real recognizes real, or game sees game, So I am just like you, like observing, seeing how someone moves, if they've done this before to somebody else, chances are it's what rolls around comes around. Like, I don't know how many song lyrics I gotta say for it to be valid, but it's so valid. But really, like, really checking in. When you're connected with this person, does it feel expansive? Like, does it feel refreshing? Does it feel inspiring? Or does it feel like, oh shit, like I gotta take this, I don't want to answer this text message right now.
I love that.
I was just gonna say, like, the communication, like we talked about, the boundaries that we talked about, the emotional support, and then making sure, like, they don't have to like my posts on social media, but are they gonna see my name behind closed doors, and only you can determine if that's the case or not, because it's ultimately how they're making you feel and how you're trusting in on those instincts.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot. So thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing this, your wisdom, your knowledge, your personal experience, your expertise also in working with this community, right? And supporting and doing this amazing work. Where can people find you? Where can people work with you? How can they contact you?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that. So find me on Instagram, the Chicana Therapist. I post occasionally. I'm still figuring out my relationship with social media, but my website, Cynmagana, CYNMAGANA.com. You can sign up for a newsletter. That's where I have events that happen. If folks are in the Sacramento area, I facilitate yin yoga and sound baths. I'll be doing some collabs soon. And yeah, I'm definitely reachable.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being part of today's episode. And for everyone out there, feel free to share this episode, listen to it on Spotify, watch it on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, put a comment, share it with your loved ones, and we'll be seeing you on the next episode. Bye.